Some nights the mind does not feel restless because it is confused. It feels restless because it has been trying to understand for too long, trying to explain what you feel, trying to organize what has happened, trying to find the right answer, the right meaning, the right way to move forward. Tonight, you don't need to solve anything. You don't need to reach a conclusion. You don't even need to understand what you hear. This is not a story about ideas. It is a place to rest from the effort of understanding. In modern life, we are taught that understanding means separating things. This is the thought. This is the feeling. This is the problem. This is the solution. Western science developed by learning how to divide the world into parts, by observing from a distance, by standing outside what is being studied. That way of knowing has brought many useful tools, but it is not the only way human beings have ever understood the world. In the ancient cultures where Buddhism emerged, science, philosophy, and spiritual practice were not separate fields. They were different expressions of the same question. How does this world work, and how do we live within it without suffering? Monks were not only people who prayed. They observed the movement of stars, calculated calendars, studied the body, mapped illness, and watched the mind with careful attention. Understanding did not begin by cutting the world apart. It began by noticing relationships. In ancient India, the body was not studied as a machine made of isolated pieces. It was understood as a living system connected to breath, seasons, emotions, food, sleep, and the wider rhythms of nature. Medicine, astronomy, and philosophy grew out of daily life, not laboratories. Knowledge existed to support balance, not control. This way of knowing did not ask, how do we master the world? It asked, how do we remain in harmony with what is already happening? Buddhism inherited this approach. Rather than focusing on external measurement alone, it turned its attention inward. Thoughts were observed as events. Emotions were seen as movements. Suffering was examined not as a failure, but as something that could be understood through direct experience. The Buddha did not ask followers to believe blindly. He asked them to observe, to notice what arises, to notice what passes away, to verify truth through lived experience, not authority. In this sense, Buddhism became a quiet science of the inner world, not a science that demands effort, but one that invites attention. Not a science that rushes toward answers, but one that allows understanding to unfold slowly. Tonight, you are not asked to analyze your thoughts. You are not asked to fix your feelings. You are simply invited to notice that trying itself can be tiring. If understanding feels heavy, you are allowed to rest from it. If your mind wants clarity, you can let clarity wait. Nothing important will be lost by not knowing tonight. As you listen, you may hear ideas about science, Buddhism, or the past. You do not need to remember them. You do not need to follow them. They are not instructions. They are simply sounds, moving through awareness, like breath moving through the body. For now, let the effort soften. Let the need to figure things out loosen its grip. There will be time to understand later. Tonight is for resting inside experience exactly as it is. And as the story continues, you may find that understanding is no longer something you have to chase. It begins to arrive on its own, quietly, when the trying fades. In the world we live in now, understanding usually begins by separating things. This is the observer, that is what is being observed. This is the cause, that is the result. Modern Western science grew powerful by learning how to stand outside the world and divide it into parts, by isolating variables, measuring from a distance, and removing the observer from what is being studied. This approach has given humanity remarkable tools, but it is important to remember that this way of knowing did not arise naturally everywhere. It emerged under very specific historical and philosophical conditions. In Europe, modern science developed alongside a shift away from religious authority, a movement that placed reason and objectivity above faith. To know something scientifically meant to remove belief, remove involvement, and remove the self as much as possible. Truth was something to be extracted, not lived inside. In the cultural worlds where Buddhism emerged, this separation did not happen in the same way. There was no single creator God standing outside the universe, commanding it from above. Instead, the world was understood as something that unfolds through relationships. Human beings were not placed above nature, but within it. Because of this, knowledge did not begin with control. It began with attention. In ancient India, what we now call science was never an isolated discipline. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy all grew out of daily life. They were responses to hunger, illness, seasons, birth, aging, and death. Knowledge existed to support balance, continuity, and survival, not domination. Early Indian medicine, later known as Ayurveda, did not study the body as a collection of replaceable parts. The body was seen as a living process, shaped by breath, food, sleep, climate, emotion, and time. Illness was not only a physical malfunction, but a sign of imbalance within a wider system. Understanding meant seeing how things influenced one another. Astronomy served a similar purpose. The movement of stars and planets was observed not to conquer the sky, but to understand rhythm. Calendars were created to guide planting, rituals, rest, and travel. Time was not something to be measured aggressively, but something to live in harmony with. Within this world, monks were not separated from scientists. A monk might be a physician. A philosopher might be an astronomer. A spiritual practitioner might also be responsible for calculating calendars or studying the human body. Their work was not considered contradictory. It was considered complete. When Buddhism appeared within this environment, it inherited this integrated way of knowing. Rather than rejecting science, it redirected attention toward the most immediate field of observation, experience itself. Thoughts were not treated as abstract ideas. They were events that could be noticed. Feelings were not moral failures. They were movements that arose and passed away. Suffering was not explained away. It was examined. The Buddha did not present his teachings as beliefs to accept. He offered them as observations to test. He asked people to look directly at their own experience, to notice what happens when desire arises, when fear tightens, when clinging holds on too long. In this sense, Buddhism functioned as a quiet science of the inner world, not a science of instruments, but of awareness, not a science that rushes toward conclusions, but one that stays close to what is actually happening. This approach does not reject analysis. It simply refuses to place analysis above experience. Understanding is allowed to emerge slowly, through observation rather than being forced through effort. If this feels unfamiliar, that is natural. Most of us have been trained to believe that effort creates clarity, that thinking harder will eventually bring peace. But tonight, you are invited to consider another possibility. What if clarity does not come from trying harder, but from paying gentler attention? What if understanding is something that settles rather than something that must be chased? As you listen, you don't need to remember these ideas. You don't need to agree with them. They are not instructions for improvement. They are simply part of the atmosphere of this story. The important thing is not the concepts themselves. It is the permission they offer, permission to stop forcing meaning, permission to let understanding rest. As this story continues, the focus will shift again and again between knowledge and quiet, between thought and rest. For now, allow this way of seeing to sit lightly in the background, like a dim lamp in the room. You don't need to look at it directly, just let it be there, while the effort to understand slowly loosens its grip. This way of knowing also explains something that may feel familiar to you tonight. Why thinking harder does not always bring relief. Why effort sometimes increases tension instead of resolving it. When knowledge is built on separation, the mind is trained to stand apart from what it feels, to observe from a distance, to analyze rather than inhabit. Over time, this can create a subtle sense of isolation, even inside one's own thoughts. The traditions that shaped early Buddhism approached understanding differently. They did not assume that the observer could ever be fully removed from what is observed. To know something meant to participate in it, to remain close, to stay involved. This is why observation in Buddhism is never cold or detached. Attention is steady, but it is also intimate. It does not push experience away in order to study it. It stays with experience long enough for its patterns to reveal themselves. In ancient Indian thought, knowledge was trusted when it remained connected to life, when it could be felt in the body, when it altered how one breathed, slept, ate, and related to others. Understanding that could not be lived was considered incomplete. This is also why Buddhist inquiry often begins with very simple questions. What is happening right now? What changes when you hold on? What changes when you release? These are not questions meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to be returned to again and again until effort softens into familiarity. If you notice your mind trying to grasp these ideas, that is okay. That habit has been carefully trained. You don't need to stop it. You can let it slow down on its own. For centuries, this approach allowed science, medicine, and philosophy to remain close to human experience in many parts of Asia. Knowledge was not something abstract and distant. It was something that moved with the seasons, the body, and the quiet rhythms of daily life. Tonight, you don't need to adopt any of these ways of seeing. You are simply being offered a glimpse of a different relationship with understanding. One where clarity does not have to be forced. One where effort is optional. You may already feel moments when trying loosens its grip, small pauses between thoughts, gentle spaces where nothing needs to be solved. Those moments are enough. They don't need to be expanded or explained. They only need to be noticed. After thinking for so long, it can feel strange to stop. The mind may still want to hold on, to follow the last idea, to make sure nothing important is missed. You don't need to push that impulse away. You can let it rest beside you without giving it a task. For a moment, allow attention to move away from understanding and toward simple presence, not toward doing anything special, just toward what is already here. You may notice the rhythm of your breath without needing to control it. The quiet weight of your body supported by whatever you are resting on. The subtle temperature of the air on your skin. None of this needs interpretation. In the traditions that shaped early Buddhist thought, observation was never meant to create distance. It was meant to bring familiarity, to stay close enough that effort became unnecessary. You can try that now in a very simple way. Instead of watching your breath as an object, allow yourself to feel it from inside. The gentle movement in the chest, the slight expansion and release in the belly, breath breathing itself without instruction. If thoughts arise, let them pass like background sounds. They do not interrupt this moment. They are part of it. Nothing needs to be corrected. Earlier, you heard about knowledge that grows from participation rather than control. This is what that feels like. Not something to understand, but something to experience directly. You may notice moments when attention softens on its own, when the space between thoughts becomes wider, when the body settles a little deeper. These moments don't need to be extended. They arrive when they are ready. In many ancient traditions, rest was not considered the opposite of understanding. It was considered one of its conditions. Without rest, observation becomes tense. Without ease, awareness becomes sharp and brittle. Tonight, you are allowed to rest inside experience. You are allowed to stop managing your inner world. Nothing bad happens when you let things be. If your mind drifts, that is fine. If you lose track of the story, that is fine. You don't need to listen carefully. You don't need to remember anything. This story is not asking for attention. It is offering a place where attention can relax. You may notice how different this feels from trying to understand. There is no pressure to reach a conclusion, no need to organize what you feel, no need to decide what comes next, just this moment, unfolding on its own. As the body grows heavier, allow it. As the breath becomes quieter, allow it. As awareness drifts in and out, allow it. Understanding can wait, effort can rest. Nothing important is being missed. And as the story continues, you may find yourself slipping gently between listening and not listening at all. Both are welcome here. Both lead in the same direction. For now, stay where you are or drift. Either way, there is nothing you need to do. You may begin to sense that the body understands something the mind does not need to explain. A quiet intelligence that knows how to settle without instruction. A way of resting that does not require effort, intention, or control. The body has been doing this for a long time, long before you learned how to think things through, long before you learned how to hold yourself together. You don't need to help it. You don't need to guide it. You can let it return to its own rhythm. Notice how rest does not arrive all at once. It comes in small movements, a softening here, a loosening there, a gradual sense of weight spreading through the body, as if gravity itself has become kinder. There is nothing to adjust, nothing to correct, nothing to perform. In older ways of understanding, rest was never treated as laziness. It was seen as a natural state of balance. When effort pauses, balance returns on its own. You may feel moments where awareness drifts slightly away, then returns, then drifts again. This gentle movement is not a problem. It is a sign that attention no longer needs to stay alert. If thoughts appear, let them pass without commentary. You don't need to follow them. You don't need to finish them. They can remain incomplete. You are allowed to leave things unfinished tonight. Questions, plans, even the sense of who you are supposed to be. None of that needs to be carried into rest. As the need to manage experience continues to fade, you may notice a growing sense of neutrality. Not pleasure, not discomfort, just a quiet, even presence. This is not something to hold on to. It will come and go on its own. If listening becomes distant, that is fine. If the voice fades into the background, that is fine. If sleep arrives without announcement, that is fine too. There is no moment you need to wait for, no signal you need to recognize. The body already knows where this is going. You don't have to accompany it all the way. For now, let the voice remain, or let it dissolve into silence. Let rest deepen without observation. Let awareness loosen its grip completely, if it wants to. Nothing important is being missed. Nothing needs to be remembered. Just this quiet continuing on its own. Long before science became something written in textbooks, it existed as part of everyday life. In ancient India, knowledge did not live apart from the body, the seasons, or the rhythms of daily living. It grew out of the simple need to understand how life moves, changes, and sustains itself. Early Indian thinkers paid close attention to patterns, the rise and fall of the sun, the cycle of rains, the way food, sleep, and emotion affected the body. Understanding was not pursued for control, but for continuity. What later generations would separate into medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy were once part of the same inquiry. How does balance return when it is disturbed? How does life recover when something falls out of rhythm? Medical knowledge in this world was shaped by observation over long periods of time. The body was understood as a process rather than a structure. Health was not defined as perfection, but as adaptability. Illness was often seen as a sign that something in the larger system had lost its balance. Time itself was approached in a similar way. The study of the sky was not driven by curiosity alone, but by necessity. Knowing when to plant, when to travel, when to rest, and when to gather required careful attention to the movement of the heavens. Calendars became tools for living, not just for measuring. In this environment, knowledge was trusted when it remained close to experience. If it could be felt in the body, if it could be confirmed through daily life, if it helped reduce unnecessary struggle. This is the world into which Buddhism was born. When the Buddha began teaching, he did not step outside these traditions. He refined them. Instead of turning attention outward toward the stars or inward toward abstract theory, he focused on something more immediate, the experience of suffering and its release. Rather than asking why the universe exists, he asked why the human mind struggles, why dissatisfaction returns even after pleasure, why effort so often leads to exhaustion instead of peace. The method he offered was not belief, but investigation. People were encouraged to observe their own experience with the same care that earlier thinkers had applied to the body or the sky, to notice how desire tightens, how aversion contracts, how clinging creates strain. This inward observation did not reject the body, it depended on it. Breath, posture, sensation, and attention all became fields of study. The body was not something to escape, but something to understand gently from within. What made this approach unusual was its simplicity. The questions were ordinary. What happens when you hold on? What happens when you let go? What changes when attention softens? These questions were never meant to be answered once. They were meant to be lived with, returned to slowly, allowed to deepen over time. Because of this, Buddhist inquiry remained closely tied to daily life. Walking, eating, resting, and breathing were all considered valid places for understanding to grow. Knowledge was not reserved for scholars alone. It belonged to anyone willing to observe carefully. Over centuries, this way of seeing influenced how knowledge developed across much of Asia. Science and philosophy did not disappear. They remained, but they moved alongside ethical reflection, bodily awareness, and contemplative practice. For the mind listening tonight, this matters in a quiet way. It suggests that understanding does not need to be forced or accelerated. That insight often comes not from intensity, but from patience, not from effort, but from familiarity. You don't need to adopt these ideas. You don't need to agree with them. They are simply part of the atmosphere of this story, offering another way to relate to knowing. As the night deepens, you may notice that the need to grasp these ideas begins to fade. That is not a failure of attention. It is a return to the kind of understanding that does not require holding on. Knowledge, in this older sense, was never meant to keep you awake. It was meant to help you live and then to let you rest. And as this story continues, the focus will soften again, moving away from explanation and back toward experience, where nothing needs to be concluded and nothing needs to be resolved tonight. In this older view of knowledge, there was no hurry to arrive at conclusions. Understanding was not something to complete. It was something to stay close to. Learning unfolded at the same pace as life itself, slowly, unevenly, with room for uncertainty. This is why silence was never seen as empty. It was part of the process. Moments when nothing new appeared were not failures of inquiry, but signs that observation had settled deeply enough to rest. In Buddhist traditions, this patience became especially important. Insight was not expected to appear on command. It was allowed to arise when conditions were gentle enough to receive it, when the body was steady, when attention was unforced, when the mind was no longer trying to arrive somewhere else. This way of learning trusted that understanding could not be rushed without distortion, that forcing clarity often created tension rather than wisdom. So effort was applied carefully and then released. For someone listening at night, this approach offers quiet reassurance. You do not need to reach clarity before you sleep. You do not need to resolve what you have been carrying. Understanding is not something you can lose by resting. If insight comes later, it will come in its own time. If it does not, nothing is wrong. Life continues to move, breathe, and adjust without explanation. This is the kind of knowing that does not demand attention. It does not keep you alert. It does not insist on being remembered. It simply stays nearby, like something familiar you do not need to look at directly, quietly supporting you as the night continues. As the night continues, the need to think may begin to fade on its own, not because anything has been resolved, but because the body no longer asks for resolution. You may notice how different this feels from effort. There is no direction to follow, no understanding to reach, just the quiet presence of being here. Imagine the knowledge you have been carrying gently settling like sediment in still water. Nothing needs to be removed. Nothing needs to be examined. It simply sinks when the movement stops. The mind does not need to stay alert for this to happen. It happens when attention softens, when nothing is being held too tightly. You may become aware of the room around you, not in detail, but as a general sense of space. The air feels quieter now. Sounds are farther away or closer without needing to be named. Everything feels less demanding. In older ways of understanding, night was not seen as an interruption. It was part of the rhythm, a time when explanation rests and experience continues without commentary. You can let that rhythm take over now. Breath moves without guidance. The body rests without instruction. Awareness drifts without effort. If thoughts appear, they do not need your response. They can pass like distant lights, briefly visible, then gone. You don't need to follow them. You don't need to complete them. There may be moments when you forget the voice entirely. Moments when listening fades and returns. This is not something to correct. It is a sign that rest is deepening. Nothing is being asked of you. You are not meant to stay awake. You are not meant to understand. If sleep begins to arrive, allow it. If it does not, that is fine too. The body knows how to rest even when sleep is light. Notice how effort is no longer necessary. There is nothing to maintain, nothing to hold together, nothing to prepare for. This is not a space where insight needs to appear. It is a space where effort disappears. You may feel yourself becoming less defined, less focused on thoughts, less aware of boundaries, just a gentle sense of existing without description. Let that be enough. As the story continues, it will move quietly beside you without asking for attention. You are free to listen. You are free to drift. You are free to sleep. Nothing important will be missed. You may begin to notice how little effort is needed now, not because you decided to relax, but because the need to decide has faded. The body no longer waits for instruction. Breath moves at its own pace. Muscles release without being told to. Gravity feels more present, more supportive. In this quiet state, even attention can rest. You don't need to keep track of where you are in the story. You don't need to notice how deeply you are resting. Awareness can drift without supervision. Imagine the night itself doing the work for you, darkness holding everything in place, time stretching gently without direction or urgency. In older traditions, this kind of rest was trusted. Nothing needed to be proven during the night. Nothing needed to be solved. The body and mind were allowed to reorganize themselves in silence. If sensations shift, let them shift. Warmth, heaviness, lightness, all of it can move freely without needing explanation. You may notice that thoughts appear less complete now. They begin, then fade before finishing. This is not distraction. It is the mind releasing its grip. There is no reason to bring it back. Listening can soften into something quieter than listening. The sound of the voice may blend with the background of the night. Words may lose their edges. Meaning may no longer matter. This is exactly how it should be. You are not required to stay present. You are not required to stay aware. You are allowed to drift without checking where you are going. Rest does not need witnesses. As the body settles further, even the sense of effort dissolves. There is nothing left to manage, nothing left to prepare, nothing left to hold together, just this slow, gentle unfolding into rest. The night continues whether you notice it or not, and the story will remain beside you, quiet and unintrusive, allowing sleep to come in its own way at its own time. In some places, the older relationship between knowledge and life was not completely broken by modernity. It adapted. It learned to coexist. One of those places was the Tibetan cultural world. For centuries, Tibetan Buddhism preserved a way of understanding that did not separate observation, medicine, and contemplation. Knowledge was not locked into texts alone. It was practiced, lived, repeated across generations. In Tibetan monasteries, learning was never limited to philosophy. Alongside meditation and ethical study, there was careful attention to the body, how breath moves through it, how energy circulates, how imbalance appears, not suddenly, but gradually. Tibetan medicine developed as part of this same environment. The body was not viewed as a mechanical object to be repaired in isolation. It was understood as a system shaped by climate, food, emotion, behavior, and time. Health meant adaptability. Illness meant that something had fallen out of rhythm. Detailed illustrations were created to map this understanding. Not diagrams meant to dominate the body, but images meant to help practitioners recognize patterns. They showed organs, channels, and processes as part of a larger flow. The human body was presented as something dynamic, not fixed. What makes this tradition especially unusual is that it never claimed exclusivity. Tibetan practitioners did not insist that their understanding replace all others. When modern Western medicine arrived, it was not rejected. It was placed alongside existing knowledge. In some Tibetan regions, hospitals developed where both systems were used together. Modern diagnostics existed next to traditional observation. Scientific instruments existed alongside careful attention to pulse, breath, and appearance. Neither was asked to disappear. This coexistence reveals something important about the older scientific mindset. It was not concerned with winning arguments. It was concerned with reducing suffering. Understanding was evaluated not by theory alone, but by its effects. Did it support balance? Did it help people live with less strain? Did it work gently without causing harm? This way of knowing required patience. It trusted slow observation more than rapid conclusions. It allowed complexity to remain complex. In Buddhist practice, this patience extended inward. The same care used to observe the body was applied to the mind. Thoughts were not treated as enemies. Emotions were not treated as mistakes. They were signals, patterns, movements to be understood through familiarity. The idea was never to control the inner world. It was to become intimate with it, close enough that reactions softened on their own. For someone listening at night, this matters quietly. It suggests that understanding does not have to be sharp to be real, that insight does not need force, that gentleness can be precise. You do not need to remember any of this. You do not need to agree with it. These ideas are not instructions. They are simply part of the atmosphere of this story, a reminder that other ways of knowing have existed, ways that did not rush, ways that did not separate the observer from what was being observed. In this older sense, science was not opposed to rest. It depended on it. Observation required stillness. Understanding required time. As the night continues, you may notice how different this feels from effort. There is no urgency here, no demand for clarity. The kind of knowledge preserved in these traditions was never meant to keep the mind awake. It was meant to help life unfold with less friction. And then, when the day ended, to let the mind rest completely. As this section ends, the story will soften again, moving away from explanation and back into quiet experience. You do not need to follow it. You can let it pass beside you like something familiar that no longer requires attention. In these traditions, time was never treated as something to race against. Learning unfolded slowly, often over a lifetime, sometimes over several generations. Knowledge was not expected to arrive all at once. It was shaped through repetition, through returning to the same observations again and again, allowing them to deepen naturally. This is why Tibetan learning environments were often quiet, patient places. Understanding was not measured by speed. It was measured by steadiness. A student might spend years observing the same processes, the same rhythms of breath, the same signs of imbalance, not to master them, but to become familiar with them. This patience extended to the way suffering was approached. Nothing was forced to resolve quickly. Discomfort was listened to. Patterns were allowed to reveal themselves over time. In this sense, knowledge was never separated from compassion. To understand something was also to care for it. Harsh certainty was avoided because it often caused harm. This gentle relationship with knowing is part of why these traditions could adapt without breaking. They did not need to defend themselves aggressively. They could change without losing their core. For someone listening at night, this can feel unfamiliar but reassuring. It suggests that there is no urgency to arrive anywhere, no need to reach clarity before resting. Understanding does not disappear when effort stops. It simply waits. And when the body and mind are ready, it returns quietly without demand. For now, it is enough to know that other rhythms have existed, ways of learning that did not disturb sleep, ways of understanding that allowed the night to remain a place of rest. As the story moves on, there is nothing new you need to take in, no ideas to hold, no understanding to reach. The work of thinking has already been done. Now the body is free to take over. You may notice how awareness no longer feels focused in one place. It spreads out, becoming softer at the edges, less concerned with details, more comfortable with not knowing exactly where it is. The body does not need to be guided into rest. It recognizes the conditions on its own: quiet, stillness, the absence of demand. Breath continues without instruction, sometimes shallow, sometimes deeper, always finding its own rhythm. You don't need to follow it. You don't need to count. You don't need to check whether it is calm enough. Muscles release in their own time, not all at once, not evenly. A slow, uneven settling, like the ground after movement, stops. If sensations appear, let them appear. Warmth, heaviness, a sense of floating, or nothing at all. There is no correct experience here. The mind may still produce fragments of thought, incomplete images, half-finished sentences. They do not require your participation. You can let them drift past without following, without finishing, without reacting. They dissolve when they are no longer held. In this depth of rest, even listening becomes optional. The sound of the voice may feel distant, as if coming from another room. Words may lose their shape, meaning may fade. This is not a loss of attention, it is attention resting. The body understands how to sleep without being told how. It has done this many times before. You do not need to stay present for it to happen. If sleep arrives now, let it take you. If it does not, rest is still happening. The nervous system settles whether or not consciousness follows. There is no moment you need to witness, no transition you need to notice. Nothing important depends on you staying awake. As effort dissolves further, even the sense of self may feel less defined. Thoughts about who you are, what you are doing, or what comes next may no longer feel relevant. This is not something to hold on to. It is simply the mind loosening its grip. Let that be enough. The night is already doing its work. Time moves without urgency. The body rests without supervision. You are allowed to disappear into rest for a while. You will return when you need to. For now there is nowhere else to be, nothing else to do, nothing else to understand. Just this quiet continuation carrying you gently towards sleep. You may sense now that even the idea of resting has become unnecessary. There is no longer a need to arrive anywhere, no need to monitor how deeply you are settling. The process is already complete enough to continue without you. Awareness grows simpler, not narrower but softer, less interested in detail, more comfortable with absence. The body rests in layers. Some parts settle quickly, others take their time. Nothing needs to be synchronized. Breath continues quietly, without asking to be noticed. It moves as it always has, reliable and unremarkable. You do not need to stay with it. It does not need company. If images appear, let them blur before they form. If fragments of memory surface, allow them to pass without recognition. They do not belong to a story that needs to be told. Thoughts may lose their beginning and their end. They may appear only as texture, as movement without direction. This is a sign that effort has fully loosened. There is no reason to gather yourself, no reason to return attention to the voice. Listening can fade completely if it wants to. In this depth, even the sense of time may dissolve. Minutes no longer line up. Moments do not follow one another in any clear way. Everything becomes continuous. This is not something to notice. It happens naturally when nothing is being held. You are not responsible for staying here. You are not responsible for crossing into sleep. The body knows how to do this without awareness. If sleep comes suddenly, allow it. If it comes slowly, allow that too. Both are signs that nothing is wrong. The night does not need supervision. It unfolds on its own. You may feel yourself becoming less distinct, less centered around thought, less aware of boundaries. This is not disappearance, it is release. Let the body sink into whatever supports it. Let gravity finish its work. Let muscles remain loose without instruction. There is nothing left to manage, nothing left to prepare, nothing left to remember. Even the sense of being someone who is listening can fade. The voice may seem far away now. Words may no longer form meaning. Sound becomes texture. This is the point where effort is no longer present at all. You are free to remain here without attention, free to drift, free to sleep. Rest does not need awareness. Sleep does not need permission. The night will carry you the rest of the way. As this story comes to its quiet end, there is nothing you need to carry forward. No idea needs to stay with you. No understanding needs to remain clear. The voice can soften now, becoming less important. Words no longer need to connect. Meaning no longer needs to form. You have already done enough by resting here. If sleep has arrived, let it continue without interruption. If you are still awake, that is fine too. Rest does not depend on sleep. It deepens in its own way. There is no final message waiting for you, no conclusion to reach, no lesson to remember. Tonight does not require resolution. The body remains supported. Breath continues quietly. Time moves without asking for attention. You do not need to follow the story any further. It can drift away on its own. You can drift with it or beyond it. Nothing is ending in a way that needs noticing. Nothing is beginning that needs preparation. This space remains open, even as the words fade. Quiet enough for sleep, quiet enough for rest. You are allowed to let go completely now, of listening, of thinking, of staying present. The night will hold what remains, and the story will leave without asking to be remembered. There is nothing else you need to do. Sometimes peace is not something we must learn. It is something we remember. The world pulls us outward, toward goals, toward noise, toward endless motion. But when the heart grows quiet, we begin to sense a deeper rhythm beneath it all, a rhythm that has always been waiting, softly calling us home. This quiet home lives inside you, but it can be easy to forget. That is why Gassho exists, not to add anything new, but to help you return. A space built for stillness, for reflection, for the gentle work of being. In its name, Gassho, there is a gesture, two hands meeting in respect and gratitude, a gesture of unity between self and world, between heart and breath, between sound and silence. When you open the Gassho app, you are not entering another screen. You are stepping into a small temple that travels with you, a place where you can sit without expectation, breathe without demand, and listen without effort. Inside you will find guided meditations, stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, and the steady presence of sutras, not as lessons, but as companions. The sound you are about to hear is one of those companions, a sound carried through generations, a sound shaped by breath, devotion, and time. You do not need to understand the words. You do not need to follow the rhythm. You do not need to stay awake for it. Let the sound arrive as it is. Let it move through awareness without resistance. Let it remain, even as attention fades. There is nothing left to do, only to rest. Let the breath settle, let the body sink, and simply listen. The sound of the sutra continues, offered from a temple in the quiet mountains of Koyasan, shared here through the Gassho app whenever you wish to return to silence.
So Should